Welcome inside the voice of college football. I am your host today, Austin Robbie. We've got a jam-packed show. So the Hogs played football this past Saturday, hosted the Texas A&M Aggies, number fourth team in the country. We did not do a post-game show, but we've got a lot to talk about it today. So ultimately fell short, 45-42, what was a absolute barn burner of a football game. Going in, we were 7.5 point dogs. The over/under was 57.5, and both teams got close to that just in their own right. This was a game that was scheduled at 2:30, but got pushed back because of rain. And man, it was a heck of a battle. I was able to go to this game, and it was neck and neck the whole way. And we really gave A&M a run for their money, but ultimately fell up short. We're going to be talking about that today. We're also going to be talking about the upcoming football game against the Auburn Tigers this weekend. A battle of some winless SEC teams right there. So neither team has won a game in the SEC. Both have tried about as hard as they could. Both have been close losses throughout their schedule so far this year, but they're going to face each other this weekend. Hoping the Hogs can come out victorious in that one. But let's kick it off today. We're going to start off with the Texas A&M game. We're just going to kind of talk about, like I do each time we've played a game, kind of the offense, what I saw from that side of the football, and the defense. We're going to assign a grade to both sides of the football. Just let you know how they did, some positives, some negatives. For some sides of the football, it's a lot of positives, and some sides of the football, it's a whole lot of negatives. But we'll kick it off, and we'll start with the Texas A&M game recap. So the offensive grade, I'm going to give in this situation an A minus. So I predicted my score prior to the game this time last Monday, and preseason I predicted us to win this football game. I didn't necessarily know how good Texas A&M was going to be, but I thought we could win this football game at home. First time we've played that game at home in a long time, and I necessarily didn't think that A&M would be the fourth team in the country going into that game. So I thought we would win. Now, last Monday, I decided to hold true to that prediction. I thought we would win. I had us winning 27-24. It ultimately was a 3 point football game, significantly higher scoring, and I was ultimately wrong about my prediction. The Texas A&M Aggies did defeat the Arkansas Razorbacks. But on the offensive side of the football, the reason I give the grade and I say all that as an A minus is because I thought we'd score 27 and we ultimately scored 42 points. The offense exceeded my expectations. This was a defense that wasn't necessarily phenomenal, but in their SEC play, A&M looked really good defensively. They were out. Uh, they had out offensive yardage their opponents by over 150 yards in all three games prior to that. And in Auburn, they played Florida and Mississippi State at home. This was their first true road test. So I really thought, yes, they would maybe give up a little more points than they had in the past. But to give up 42 points and us score 42, like that was a big deal to me. We did a really good job offensively. Couple couple spots on the positive side of things. 527 total yards. I made that. I showed you that stat, or I let you know about that stat where A&M in their three SEC games had 150 more offensive yards on average than their opponents. We actually had 30 more yards than A&M. So we actually out yardaged them, 527 yards of total offense. They had just under 500. And we were able to score on 70% of drives. 50% of the drives were touchdowns. Uh, we had uh, we had a field goal as well in there. Actually, I believe we may have had two field goals. Yeah, Scott Starzik had two 22-yard field goals. So seeing 42, I thought it was just six touchdowns. But yeah, two field goals in there. So, but 50% of those drives to be touchdowns on a fairly, I would say, competent defense, not necessarily one of the best in the SEC. But prior to that game, they had shown in SEC play, at the very least, to be really competitive. Now, defensive side of the football, this is where the grade gets really bad really quickly. I had the defense graded as an F, and I don't really know if you could give it really anything else. I thought we'd hold them to 24, not necessarily because we've shown that. That's me just being, I think, a little bit optimistic. I don't think most people that were predicting this game outside of the Razorback bias would have had A&M at 24 points. A&M has shown the ability to score more than that. In fact, they scored 41 on Notre Dame, but I didn't think they would score 45. And just a couple of numbers to show you what they did defensively, or how well they did offensively, how bad we did defensively. One positive note, we held their top two receivers, who I talked about all last week, Mario Craver, Casey Concepcion, held the two receivers to combined 87 total yards. So on that front, you know, got to give them credit for that. However, in that same vein, we gave up nearly 200 receiving yards to the other players. So that includes some tight ends, some other receivers, running backs. So we held those two to 87, but we also gave up a lot to the other players. So we let them beat us. We decided we were going to really crack down on Concepcion and Craver, but ultimately those other guys did beat us as well. Another week where we forced 0 sacks and 0 turnovers. This was the same message after the Tennessee game: 0 sacks, 0 turnovers. To have that happen again, a little disgruntling because we're in a spot where when our offense is so potent as they've been, and our defense has been so bad, just to get one of those, just a sack on a third down or a turnover just to prevent them from scoring. That could be the difference in the game here. So once again, 0 sacks, 0 turnovers. And then we gave up 50 plus rushing yards to 3 different guys. So that included their starting running back, Ruben Owens III. Marcel Reed was one of those guys, and then E.J. Smith, Emmitt Smith's son. All 3 had a fairly good day. Owens about 4.9 yards a carry, and then the other 2 guys over 7 yards a carry. So we let them run all over us, 217 total rush yards. Not a great day for our run defense, who I think is a little bit better on the year than our past defense, but they had no problem in both realms. So offensive grade an A minus. The defensive grade, I think it can't be anything but an F. Just a couple other notes before we switch over to the Auburn game. I talked about last week how well we did in the penalty department. Tennessee, I think they had 10 penalties and we had 1. So we clearly won that battle last week. This week, not the same case. Now they did still have 7, but we had 9 for 75 yards. So to go from 1 penalty to 9 penalties, that just can't have that happen. So that was a tough spot for us. And then for Texas A&M, their first 8 drives of the game, so all of the first half and a couple drives to start the second half, 6 of those drives were touchdowns, and 7 of those drives, they resulted in scores. They had a field goal in there. So the defense just couldn't do anything. Their first 8 drives, we held them once to a punt. So we really kind of got behind the 8 ball. And I will say it was a 3-point game, but it really was more of a kind of a 2-score game throughout the majority of it. Like at half, it was 21-20, but they came out straight up and got 10 points. And then we scored, and then they scored, and we really never kind of got within that after about early in the fourth quarter. But ultimately, what the score was, 45-42. Once again, we covered, whatever that means. And we're looking at a spot now going into this week facing an Auburn team who's kind of had the same story as us. They haven't fired their coach yet, but they really are going through it and are winless in the SEC. But we're going to get back to that in just a second.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks: 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select a betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.
All right. This weekend, we are facing the Auburn Tigers. They're 3-4 currently on the season. We're going to kind of preview this game. Like we do every single week, we're going to talk a little bit about what they do offensively, what they do defensively, and then we'll talk a little bit about us and kind of where I see our strengths against their weaknesses, and then their strengths against our weaknesses. I try to focus really on the opponent we're going to be playing. Obviously, this being a Razorback channel, we hear about the Razorbacks all the time, and obviously being fans of the Razorbacks, we're kind of in tune with the players that we have and how well we're doing on our side. But I think to me, the biggest thing we can do is kind of just be familiar with the opponent that we're going to be playing. So kicking it off with them, they're 3-4, like I mentioned, 0-4 in the SEC. It's been a rough season for them. They kicked off the season with a win at Baylor, big time win for them. And it's kind of been downhill since. They won 2 Group of 5 wins with Ball State and Ball State and South Alabama, excuse me. But they've played 4 straight ranked opponents: number 11 Oklahoma, number 9 Texas A&M, like we did, number 10 Georgia, and then number 16 Missouri Tigers. Now, they had a bye sandwiched in there, but those first two games were on the road, last two at home. And it's been tough. Like it's been they've lost all four of those games, all four top 16 teams in the country. And this is a team where kind of like us, they're solid. They're better, I think, than people give them credit for, but they've also ultimately lost like a lot. So same boat as us, but let's kick it off on the offensive side of the football. And we're going to start off with three players to know and then some stats for you to know. On the offensive side, obviously it starts with number 11 quarterback Jackson Arnold, the transfer out of Oklahoma, a dual threat quarterback, a guy who has 12 touchdowns off passing and rushing combined, and only two turnovers. So he only has one interception, and then he's got one fumble lost, and then he has 1451 total yards. The breakdown on that. About 1,200 passing, a little under 300 yards rushing, and those touchdowns. He actually has more rushing touchdowns than he does passing touchdowns. On the ground, you've got Jeremiah Cobb, number 23. He has 564 rushing yards, a little over 6 yards a carry, four rushing touchdowns. Not as involved in the receiving game, just has two receptions on the year. And then the two receivers really to know. So you got Cam Coleman, number 8, a guy who's been at Auburn his whole career, more of their big bodied threat, somewhere around 6'3", 200. He's their leading receiver right now in yards, and then tied for in touchdowns. They only have 5 touchdown catches on the season. He's got 2 of them. And then Eric Singleton Jr., I'm sure a lot of people who are really deep college football fans maybe know his name, a transfer in from Georgia Tech, a big-time player for them last year. He leads the Auburn Tigers in receptions, second in yards, 311, and then he also has 2 of those touchdown catches. So that's a lot of their offense. They've got a couple guys notable in the line, especially offensive tackle Xavier Chaplin, a transfer in from Virginia Tech, and then Connor Liu, who's actually going to be reportedly out for the season after that Missouri game last week, a starting center who, from what I've seen in the draft community, maybe first, second round pick. So that's a big time loss for them, and hopefully allows us, at least on the defensive side, to get after them on the inside. So that's a little bit to know about their offense. Another note on their rushing game and their offensive line specifically. As a group, I mentioned Cobb's numbers, but as a group, 163 rushing yards per game or so, and about a little over 2 rushing touchdowns a game. That's really their bread and butter, is going to be running the football. They do that better than passing the football. So look for them to dominate in the run game. I'm interested to see how much Connor Liu impacts that. And then their offensive line specifically kind of struggled, similar to our offensive line. Actually, their line's been a little bit worse. They've allowed 28 sacks this season. I'm sure a lot of college football fans know about the OU game where they had 10 sacks on Jackson Arnold. But of those 28, 19 have come in those 4 SEC games. So those four teams, obviously a little bit more highly touted than us, but have had really no problem getting to Jackson Arnold. So hopefully we will have that same type of energy on the defensive side as well. Now, let's switch to their defensive side. 3 names to know as well on this side. Many people probably know number 15 defensive end Keldrick Falk. He was the big name going into the season. Another guy who's had a lot of success, number 24, kind of a hybrid pass rusher, Keyron Crawford, plays defensive end and linebacker. And then actually at linebacker, who leads the SEC in solo tackles, number 17, Xavier Atkins. So those are the 3 names to know. Between Falk and Crawford, just the 2 of them, they have 12 tackles for loss and 7 sacks. Crawford's actually been kind of the higher end of those numbers. Falk was the guy who a lot of people were talking about going into the season. He still played well, but Crawford's really broken out and had some good numbers so far in their first 7 games. Right now, too, defensively, they're only allowing 87 yards on the ground and 102 in the SEC. So only about 15 more in the SEC. They've still had that same success. I know they shut down OU really well. I'm pretty sure A&M had a pretty big day. I think 200 plus rush yards. But all those other 3 teams, sub 100, and Georgia, Missouri, Oklahoma, they did well against them. And then another note, 18 points per game allowed on the total for the season, and only about 21 in the SEC. So another thing, you get about a field goal extra for an SEC team. And unlike A&M, like we talked about last week, they were going into their first road matchup, right? They played 3 straight home games against some fairly mediocre competition. Like Florida just fired their coach. Auburn and Mississippi State are still winless in the SEC. Arkansas was, I don't want to say their first true test, because obviously we're not that competitive as well in the SEC, but it was their first road game. Not the case here for Auburn. Auburn's played 2 road games to start the season with Oklahoma and A&M, and then they played 2 home. But they've seen experience. I mean, Oklahoma and A&M are two of the top 15 teams, I think, in the country, and A&M, I think, is now up to 3. So very highly competitive teams there. They're going to be used to having played on the road going into this game. So after saying all that, looking at their team from the offensive side and the defensive side, where do I think we can win this weekend? It starts with the pass yards. Like it starts with the offensive side of football and passing the football specifically with Taylor Green. Auburn allows 230 pass yards per game, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you only give up 87 rush yards a game, that's a big deal. And they've only had 4 interceptions. A lot of the teams we've played recently, A&M and Tennessee specifically, haven't really done a great job of picking off the football going into our games. And Taylor Green hasn't thrown an interception in those games. So don't want to jinx him, but it's a spot where I see an advantage because for us, we average 288 pass yards per game and only 5 interceptions from Green this season. And he hadn't actually had a pick in those last 2 games. Like I mentioned, so it's going to start with the passing game. Another spot where I think we can win on the defensive side of the football, we only have 11 sacks on the season. We actually haven't had, I believe, any sacks these last 2 games. Like I mentioned earlier, sacks and turnovers, 0 on both. So only 11 sacks on the season, and that's within what 6, 7 games so far this year. 7 games, 2-5 right now, and so barely over 1 a game. But I will say, like I told you earlier, Auburn's allowed 28 sacks. It's about 4 sacks per game. So this is an opportunity. We're going to talk about some players to watch and some impactful names at the end of the show. But don't be surprised. There's going to be a couple defensive ends on that list because I think that this is a spot where can we take advantage of where they lack on the offensive line with that defensive pass rush. Now, those are some wins that I see. Here's some areas where I think we could possibly struggle. We average 37 points per game on offense. Obviously, anybody that's watched us all season, any fan of Arkansas knows like this team is just the whole year. It's just been offense, like no defense whatsoever. The offense has carried us to what little wins we've had, and then in these close games, it's been the offensive side of the football. Well, we average 37. However, Auburn, I mentioned earlier, 18 points per game defensively, and they actually haven't given up 24 points to more than 24 points, excuse me, to anybody this season. Like that's home, that's away. They played at Baylor, they gave up 24. They played at OU, they gave up 24. They gave up 23 last week to Missouri, but like everything else has been in the teens. Or Georgia, they gave up 20. But like they've been seriously good defensively, and that's where A&M kind of had been as well, at least in the SEC, but they hadn't played on the road, and that makes a big difference. So for Oklahoma and the A&M game, which were on the road for Auburn, they averaged 20 points defensively. So it's shown on the road. I mean, they held Texas A&M, who we just gave up 45 points to, 16 points. Now they ultimately lost the game, and we're going to talk more about their offense and how poor it's been. But this is a spot where us averaging 37 points per game, if you look at what we've done in the last several weeks, like it's been all offense, 42 against A&M, 31 against Tennessee. Those are the 2 games since Petrino's taken over. We've really struggled. If we don't score points well, like this is going to be over quick. So I think that that's something of note to just know how good Auburn is defensively and to show that really that defense actually has traveled in the SEC and done well still. So that's one note. The other note, currently right now for us, we're at 55% on our third down conversion rate. It's actually, from what I looked last, one of the better numbers in the SEC, if not one of the best. But Auburn, on the other side of the football, they hold their opponents to around 31% third down conversion. So that's a little under 1 in every 3. Right now, we're used to getting over 1 in every 2. So it's a spot where if you take away a couple of those third down conversions, it can get a little dicey for us. We're forced to punt if those are in our territory. So look for that to be of note. Third downs are going to be really important, like they always are, but even more important in this game. So I started this last week. I threw out a couple just interesting stats, in my opinion. You may not think so, but some interesting stats to know and to look for in this game. So Auburn's average SEC loss versus our average SEC loss. So talked about both of these teams winless in the SEC, but it's been heartbreak, right? Auburn's average loss has been 7 points. They played one score in every single game except Georgia. They lost by 10. But OU, 7-point loss. A&M, 6-point loss. Missouri, 6-point loss, double overtime. Like they've had some heartbreakers. Arkansas's average loss is 4 points per game in the SEC. We played a 6-point game against Ole Miss, a 3-point game against Tennessee, and a 3-point game last week against A&M. So we've known what it's like to play close games. They know what it's like to play close games. I imagine, my guess, this is going to be a close game. So another note, this was kind of funny to me. On the offensive side of the football, we talked about how poor Auburn is, how great we've been. We're number 1 in offensive points per game in the SEC specifically, averaging about 36 points per game. even though we haven't won any of those. Same way with Auburn. Makes sense why they haven't won any, but they're dead last in offensive points per game at 13.5. So not a good number for them. But if you flip it over to the defensive side, it's the opposite story, right? Arkansas right now, we're dead last in defensive points per game, averaging about 40 points per game allowed. And then for Auburn, seventh in the SEC defensive. So not quite as high, but still it's 20.8, which is still pretty impressive to me, given our output's around 37. So it's going to be kind of a rude awakening for me, at least this weekend, and seeing how well our offense does. So let's talk about a couple most important hogs. Usually I do the hog player to watch. But I think this week I'm going to kind of switch it to the most important hog. So these are going to be names you understand, names you've seen before. But on the offensive side of the football, it's quarterback Taylor Green, like it is every single week. And a little more of a niche name here, left tackle Corey Robinson II. I mentioned how good they are at getting sacks. I think they're top 5 in the SEC. Keldrick Falk and Crawford specifically, they're going to hit on the outside. It's going to start with the blind side, left tackle Corey Robinson II. He's going to be a big name to know and a big name to watch for because he's going to have a lot of responsibility on his hands. Falk is a potential first-round pick. So this is going to be, good for his tape as a potential prospect maybe, but we're going to have to really call on him and hope that he can provide some stable offensive line play this weekend and really prevent them from getting sacks. And then on the defensive side, 2 names to know. Defensive end Quincy Rhodes Jr., Xavier Story Jr., the linebacker. Quincy Rhodes Jr. is kind of the Taylor Green of the defense, right? He's a guy not surprised to see. He's getting a lot of draft buzz, potential maybe not necessarily first, but maybe second or third round pick. Hasn't been as good these last couple weeks, but has been a very productive player for us this year. He's going to have to get after the passer. We talked about how bad their offensive line has been this season. Can he get a couple sacks and get that defensive line growing? Or can at the very least he be a decoy and let other guys like Phillip Lee, Justice Boone, maybe some of the linebackers like Sorey eat and get some sacks for us? And then Sorey, I thought he played a decent game against Texas A&M. He looked like he was getting some tackles for loss, really had some production. So I'm excited to see if he can carry that forward into this Auburn game. And linebacker play is going to be really important, specifically for a guy in Arnold who could do dual threat. I don't necessarily think our pass defense is very good, but it's in a spot where it could have an advantage, given that Arnold's not necessarily a great passer. Sorey is kind of that in between where he's going to have to defend the run, also play in coverage. So he's going to be a really big name to watch and most important hog for us on the defensive side of the football this week. But it ultimately comes down to my prediction. I've not been that great this season. I started off 2-0, thought we'd lose to Ole Miss. I switched it. I picked us to lose to Ole Miss preseason. I switched it, thought we'd win. We didn't. I was wrong against Memphis. Notre Dame, I actually did think we'd lose. We lost. Tennessee, I think we'd lose. We lost. And then the A&M game, I stuck true to my preseason pick, and I thought we'd win. It was a close game. We lost by 3. This week, I'm sticking true to my preseason pick, which was a loss to Auburn. So my ultimate prediction is going to be 24-20. Auburn gets it done for their first SEC win in Fayetteville. Heartbreaking loss, probably again for us. It's going to be a heartbreaking loss for somebody. I would love for it to not be us, but I also enjoy being right. And I think this is a spot where I think we will let down again. And I hate saying that, but I do think the Auburn Tigers get it done. I've got a couple of reasons why. The last 12 meetings we've had against Auburn, they've won 9 of them. I should have kind of saw that with the A&M game as well. They dominated us in that series, but I just still go for us. Not making the same mistake here. I think Auburn gets it done. I think it's also a revenge game. So we beat them last year in Auburn. I think they're in a spot where they're going to want to beat us in Fayetteville, which they've had success doing. We haven't beaten them at home since 2015. I thought that was crazy. I thought it was maybe like 2018, it's been 2015 since we've beaten them in Fayetteville. And both teams are desperate for a win in the SEC. I mentioned that they're both winless. And we're in a spot we fired our coach, right? But there's a real shot. I didn't realize this was I thought this was Hugh Freeze's second year, but it's his third year. He hasn't done well. He's 14-18 at Auburn right now. And to me, if he loses this game, is he get fired? Possibly. But I'm going to read you off their schedule for the remainder of the season. They have 5 games. One of them is this game this weekend. And they'll play Kentucky at home. We're going to assume they win that. So they're 3-4. Let's skip the Razorback game. That's 4-4. At Vanderbilt, let's assume they lose that. That's 4-5. Mercer, that's 5-5. And then Bama at home, they probably lose Bama. So that's 5-6. Well, this game is going to be critical for Hugh Freeze's job. Like if he wins this game, they're at 500 potential bowl game. He could still get fired. So I think in this spot where if he loses this, he could get canned this weekend. And if he does win this, he could still even be potentially canned. I think he's going to be the more desperate coach. Petrino's obviously coaching for a potential job here at the Razorbacks. but Hugh Freeze is also coaching for his life as well. And so I think Auburn may be a little more desperate. Hugh Freeze, this is a spot where if he doesn't get this done, I don't know how they have a path to 6 wins this season without upsetting Vanderbilt or Alabama. And I don't, given their losses so far this season, I don't see that happening. So I think if he wants to keep his job alive, I think he's going to have to win this weekend. Last plug before we get out of here, vocfb.com/shop. That's our merch store. If you go there, there's a team drop down. Arkansas is one of the first ones, alphabetical order. You got so many different products. If you want to support the show, go check that out. Cups, shirts, a lot of different things. Please take a look at that. vocfb.com/shop. Go check that out. Also, please like, share. You can see the ticker at the bottom. Please like, share, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and tune in to the Arkansas at the Voice of College Football. We've got live shows each and every week. The last 2 weekends, we haven't had a post-game show. We may have one this weekend. I'm not 100% sure. I've enjoyed kind of doing the Monday show and getting a little more in depth and talking about the previous game this weekend. So we'll probably do that as well anyway for the Auburn game. And then we'll be previewing the Mississippi State game as well that next Monday. It's 4:30 today, but it could be 5:30, somewhere in that time. Just keep those notifications on and you will be aware of what time we're going. So hopefully we can win our first SEC game this weekend against the Auburn Tigers. Ultimately, God bless and go Hogs.